I used to think money could fix everything. That if you earned enough, bought enough, and controlled enough, life would somehow start making sense. My name is Watson Hale, and until 2 years ago, I was one of the richest men in the city. The face you'd see on magazine covers. The man people whispered about in five-star restaurants. I owned towers that touched the clouds, cars that collectors dreamed of, and a house so big it echoed even when filled with guests. But what I didn't own was peace. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of my phone buzzing, stock alerts, emails, meeting reminders. My assistant would hand me a fresh cup of coffee before I'd even get out of bed. I'd take a sip, look out over the skyline from my penthouse balcony, and tell myself I'd made it. But I hadn't. Behind the polished smile, I was falling apart. My wife, Claire, had left me months earlier. She said I'd become a stranger. My only son, Daniel, refused to talk to me. And my employees? They feared me more than they respected me. I was surrounded by people, but lonelier than ever. Still, I didn't care. I drowned that silence with noise. Expensive parties, fake laughter, and champagne I never tasted. But the universe has a cruel way of stripping you down to what really matters. It began with a single phone call. "Sir, the board has called an emergency meeting," my lawyer said, his voice trembling. I frowned. "Why?" "We just closed the Tokyo deal." There was a pause. Then he muttered, "There's been an investigation. Someone leaked that our AI security tech caused multiple data breaches. The stock is crashing. Investors are pulling out." I remember gripping the glass so hard it shattered in my hand. "What are you saying, Michael?" I whispered. "I'm saying, Watson, it's over." That day, I lost $720 million in 6 hours. By nightfall, I had lost everything else. My reputation, my company, and every friend who had ever smiled at me for what I could offer. When I went home, my mansion felt colder than usual. The city lights outside seemed to mock me. I tried calling Claire, but the call went unanswered. I tried texting Daniel, but all he replied was, "You only call when you need something." By midnight, I was alone in a house that once hosted hundreds. And by morning, the police came with papers, fraud allegations, corporate liability. Everything under my name was frozen. I remember walking down those marble steps barefoot, past the paintings I once pretended to understand. Reporters were outside, shouting my name. "Mr. Hale, do you have anything to say about your company's collapse? Mr. Hale, how does it feel to go from billionaire to bankrupt?" I wanted to shout back. I was trying to build something good, but the words never came out. The sound of the cameras, the flashing lights, they drowned everything. And then, silence. 2 days later, I was forced out of my home. My account seized, my assets gone. I packed what I could in one small suitcase, some clothes, an old wristwatch Daniel had gifted me when he was 10, and a single photograph of Claire smiling in the garden. When I stepped out of the gate, the same street I once drove my Rolls-Royce on now felt alien. People didn't look at me with envy anymore. They looked at me with pity. I spent the next few nights sleeping in motels, then cheaper rooms, then no rooms at all. The city that once sparkled for me now seemed to push me away. I'd walk past restaurants where I once dined, and the waiters would whisper behind my back. I'd see my old business partners drive past without even a glance. One night, rain poured so heavily I could barely see the road. I had no money left. My phone was dead. I ducked under a bridge for shelter, clutching my suitcase close like a lifeline. That was the first time I saw them. A group of people huddled together, a man in a torn coat, a woman clutching a small child, an old blind musician with a broken guitar. They didn't ask me who I was. They didn't care. They just made space for me. "Cold night, huh?" the blind man said, his voice raspy but kind. "Yeah," I muttered, pulling my coat tighter. "Don't worry, morning always comes," he said with a smile that didn't need eyes to shine. And that's when I realized, for the first time in my life, someone spoke to me without expecting anything in return. I didn't know it then, but that night under the bridge was the beginning of something extraordinary. The night when the millionaire in me began to die, and the man within began to live. The first few days on the streets were the hardest. I had no plan, no money, and no idea what came next. The world I once ruled had disappeared, and in its place stood a harsh, unforgiving city that didn't care who I used to be. I remember sitting near an alley on the second morning, staring at the cracked pavement, thinking about how strange life was. Yesterday, I was Watson Hale, CEO, billionaire, philanthropist. Today, I was just another face people avoided making eye contact with. The blind man I met under the bridge introduced himself as Benji. He was in his late 60s, with a beard as white as snow and hands that trembled slightly as he strummed his guitar. Next to him sat Rosa, a single mother with a 5-year-old girl named Lila. The little girl had the brightest eyes I'd ever seen, like she could still see light in places where I saw only darkness. That morning, Benji offered me half a piece of stale bread. I refused at first. He laughed. "If you refuse kindness, son, you'll stay hungry in more ways than one." I hesitated, then took it. It was dry, tasteless, yet somehow it filled a deeper emptiness I didn't know I had. The days turned into weeks. I learned the rhythm of the streets, how to find a corner before sunset, how to warm your hands over a trash can fire, how to listen when people passed by pretending you didn't exist. Every night, I'd listen to Benji play his guitar. The sound was cracked, imperfect but full of soul. He said, "Music keeps you human, even when the world forgets you." Sometimes Rosa would hum quietly as she held Lila close, whispering bedtime stories that were more hope than truth. I found myself talking to them, really talking, for the first time in years. I told them about my previous life in vague terms. They didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer any. To them, I was just Watson, the quiet man who had lost his way. And somehow, that was enough. One cold evening, we sat near a bakery's back door. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, torturing our empty stomachs. Lila tugged my sleeve. "Mr. Watson, do you think rich people ever get hungry?" Her innocent voice pierced right through me. I wanted to tell her no, that money could buy food, comfort, safety. But I remembered those nights in my mansion when I sat before golden plates and couldn't taste a thing. So I said softly, "Yes, Lila, sometimes they do. Just in different ways." She looked at me, puzzled, then smiled. The kind of smile that comes from someone who doesn't need to understand everything to feel kindness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about the empire I'd built, about the people I'd stepped on, about how I used to pass men like Benji without a second glance. And now, I was sitting beside them, warmed by the same fire, grateful for the same piece of bread. The irony wasn't lost on me. One morning Rosa fell ill. She had a bad cough that wouldn't stop. We didn't have money for medicine, so Benji and I tried to keep her warm under the bridge. I went to a pharmacy nearby, hoping to find some help. The cashier looked at my torn coat and dirty hands. "We don't do charity here," she said coldly. I wanted to tell her I once owned the company that supplied her store's software system. But what good would that do now? I walked out empty-handed. When I returned, Lila was crying, holding her mother's hand. Benji's eyes were filled with worry. I sat beside Rosa, placed my hand on her forehead. She was burning up. Without thinking, I took off my only jacket and covered her. "Don't, Watson," Benji said quietly. "You'll freeze." "I've been cold for years, Benji," I said. This is the first time I'm doing something that feels warm." For the first time since I lost everything, I felt something inside me change. A small flicker of peace. Over the next few days, we took turns watching over Rosa and Lila. Benji played his guitar near the station, earning a few coins from passers-by. One afternoon, as I was helping Lila draw shapes on a piece of old newspaper, she suddenly asked, "Mr. Watson, Were you ever rich? The question hit me like a bullet. I froze. Why do you ask? She smiled shyly. Because you talk different, and you look at people like you remember something they forgot. I didn't answer. I just smiled back. But deep inside, I knew she was right. I wasn't the same man who once ruled boardrooms. The streets had stripped me of everything: arrogance, pride, and the illusion of control. But they had also given me something money never could: humility. As days passed, I began to notice things I never saw before. A stray dog following us every evening, an old man sharing soup with strangers, a young couple leaving food on the bench for those who needed it. The city was full of small kindnesses I had been too blind to see. Then one evening, something happened that would change everything. A black car stopped near the underpass. The window rolled down, and I caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Marcus Finn, my former business partner, the same man who had betrayed me to seize control of my company. He looked at me, confused for a moment, then shocked. "Watson, my God, is that you?" I froze. My heart pounded. I wanted to disappear. He got out, staring at me like I was a ghost. "What happened to you?" he asked. I gave a small smile. "Life," I said. "Life happened." He looked uncomfortable. "You should have fought harder. You were a genius, Watson. You could have rebuilt it all." I looked at Benji and Lila sitting near the fire. Maybe I'm building something else now. He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head and walked back to his car. But before leaving, he said something I'll never forget. "You always said money wasn't everything. I never thought you'd go this far to prove it." When his car disappeared into the night, Benji asked, "Old friend of yours?" "Once," I said, "but I think we were both strangers all along." That night, as I lay under the stars with the city humming above, I whispered to myself, I used to chase wealth. Now I'm learning what it means to be truly rich. I didn't know it yet, but the lesson was only beginning, because soon I'd face a choice, one that would test everything I had learned about life, love, and what it means to be human. The days grew colder, the nights longer, and somehow the world felt quieter, not because the noise had stopped, but because I had finally learned to listen. Rosa was recovering slowly, thanks to a kind nurse from a nearby clinic who often left discarded medicine samples by the alley. She never spoke to us, never asked who we were. She just left them near the trash bins, pretending not to see us watching. Some people show kindness without needing applause. But what truly kept us alive during those weeks was Lila. That little girl was the light in our darkness, laughing, skipping, singing off-key songs, and sharing stories about angels that lived above the clouds. She once told me, "Mom says angels come to people who forget how to smile." I think maybe that's why I met you. I didn't know what to say to that. For years, my life had been filled with applause, fake compliments, and meaningless praise. But that single innocent line from a child felt like the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. I started helping Benji earn a few coins. I wasn't much of a singer, but I could still talk. I'd tell short stories to the small crowds that gathered near us, stories about life, dreams, and second chances. Benji would play the guitar softly behind me, and Lila would collect coins in a paper cup. It was strange. For the first time in my life, people weren't paying for a product or for power. They were paying because something we did moved them. Some nights we'd earn enough to buy a loaf of bread, sometimes even soup. Other nights we had nothing. But I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't counting zeros or chasing numbers. I was simply living. One afternoon, Lila found a small injured bird near the garbage bins. Its wing was broken. She held it gently, eyes full of tears. "Mr. Watson, it's hurt. Can you fix it?" I smiled faintly. "Not like I used to fix things, Lila, but maybe we can help it heal." We made a tiny nest from an old shoebox and some cloth. For days, Lila cared for that bird like it was her own child. She'd feed it crumbs, sing to it, whisper prayers into its feathers. When the bird finally fluttered its wings and flew away, she laughed, a sound so pure that even Benji smiled through his tears. That moment, standing there under the same bridge where I had once cried in despair, I felt something break open inside me, something I'd kept buried for years. Hope. But life on the streets has a way of testing you the moment you start to believe again. One evening, Rosa didn't return. She had gone out early, hoping to find some cleaning work. Lila waited by the roadside, clutching her mother's scarf. The hours passed. The sky darkened. Still no sign of Rosa. Maybe she's just late, I said gently, though I didn't believe it myself. Lila looked up at me, her eyes trembling. She always comes back, Mr. Watson. Always. We waited until midnight. Then dawn came, and the cold crept into our bones. But Rosa didn't. Benji and I searched the nearby streets. Finally, we found out from another homeless woman that a woman matching Rosa's description had been taken to a hospital after collapsing near the docks. We rushed there, hearts pounding. When we reached the ward, the nurse hesitated. "She's in critical condition," she said softly. "Severe pneumonia." She was found too late. I walked into the dim room. Rosa lay pale and still, her breathing shallow. Lila ran to her side, clutching her hand. "Mommy, wake up, please." Rosa opened her eyes slowly, looked at me and whispered, "Take care of her, Watson. You have a kind heart now." Then she smiled, weakly, the kind of smile that feels like goodbye, and closed her eyes. Forever. Lila's cry that night shattered something inside me that no business failure ever could. For the next few days, the world seemed gray again. I tried to stay strong for Lila, but I was breaking. Benji would play soft tunes just to keep her calm. But every night, she would fall asleep holding her mother's scarf, whispering, "Good night, Mommy." One night, as the rain poured, I found myself standing under the same bridge, soaked and lost. I looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "God, I had everything once, and I wasted it. Now I have nothing. But if there's anything left in me worth saving, take it, for her." That was the night I made a promise. I would not run from pain anymore. I would not hide behind my past or my pride. I would raise that little girl like she was my own. She had given me hope when I had none. Now it was my turn to give her a life worth living. The next morning, when the sun rose, I saw Lila sitting quietly, holding a paper cup with a few coins. "Mr. Watson," she said softly, "I want to buy a dress for Mommy, for heaven." I knelt beside her, tears in my eyes. "She already has one, Lila. It's made of light." She smiled faintly, and for the first time since Rosa's death, she laughed again. That laugh became my reason to live. Little did I know, helping Lila would lead me back to a world I thought I'd left behind forever, and force me to face everything I once ran from. Time on the streets had changed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and somehow survival became a routine. Benji's music kept our spirits alive. Lila's laughter was still the sound that made even the coldest nights feel bearable. I'd managed to find a small part-time job, sweeping floors at a downtown bakery. The owner, Mrs. Patel, was a kind-hearted widow who didn't ask too many questions. She just said, "You sweep well, you stay. You cause trouble, you go." I swept, mopped, cleaned tables, and carried trash. For a man who once gave orders to hundreds, it was humbling. But strangely, I didn't hate it. For once, my hands were doing something real. Every evening, I'd bring leftovers for Benji and Lila. We'd sit by the bridge and share whatever there was. Sometimes pastries, sometimes just warm bread. Lila started going to a small public school nearby. Mrs. Patel helped me get her enrolled quietly. She didn't need to know that the man signing as guardian was once the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the city. Life was simple. Hard, but honest. Then, one afternoon, while sweeping outside the bakery, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Watson, is that really you?" I froze. When I turned, I saw Jonathan Price, my former CFO. His expensive suit, gold watch, and polished shoes screamed everything I had lost. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Good Lord. What happened to you?" I forced a smile. Oh, you know. Market crash, bad luck, karma, take your pick. He shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe it. You were a legend, Watson. You had it all. I shrugged. Now I have peace. Can't buy that with stock options, he sighed. Look, I won't pretend I didn't help Marcus when he took over your company. But things have changed. Marcus is stepping down. His reputation's in ruins. The board is looking for someone honest to clean up the mess. They need you, Watson, I blinked. They need me? After what they did? Yes. You're the only one they trust to rebuild it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air like an echo from another life. The company, my empire, my name, everything I'd lost, was suddenly within reach again. But then I looked across the street and saw Lila, waiting for me with her small backpack and that same innocent smile. She waved. And in that wave, I saw everything I had gained. I turned back to Jonathan. I'll think about it. That night I sat with Benji and told him everything. He listened quietly, plucking soft notes on his guitar. Finally he said, Seems like life's offering you a mirror, Watson. The question is, do you want to see who you were, or who you've become? I didn't sleep that night. My mind was a storm. The next morning I walked to the company's old headquarters. The same building I had designed. It still bore my name in fading silver letters, Hale Technologies. The lobby guard didn't recognize me. I stood there, staring at the marble floor I once walked on like a king. Jonathan met me at the elevator. You look nervous, he said. I smiled faintly, just remembering the ghost that used to live here. When I entered the boardroom, silence fell. The same faces, older, colder, and turned to look at me. Marcus was there too, sitting at the end of the table, guilt shadowing his face. He stood up. Watson, I owe you an apology. I looked him straight in the eye. You owe the world honesty, Marcus. Not me, Jonathan cleared his throat. The board wants to reinstate you as interim CEO. On one condition, you must agree to a rebranding. A new name, a new direction. I walked to the window, looking out over the city. The skyline shimmered like a promise I once chased and never caught. Then, quietly, I said, If I return, it won't be to rebuild what was lost. It'll be to build something better, the board murmured among themselves. Finally, one of them asked, And what would you call this? New version? I smiled. The Hale Foundation. Not a company, a mission to create technology that serves people, not power. There was silence, then slow applause. That evening, as I walked back toward the bridge, I stopped by a toy shop. I bought a small pink hair ribbon for Lila. It cost me almost all the money I had earned that week, but it felt right. When I reached the underpass, Benji was playing his usual tune, and Lila ran up to me. Mr. Watson, look, I got a gold star at school. I laughed and tied the ribbon in her hair. Now you look like an angel, she giggled. Mommy would have said that too. I looked up at the night sky, one star shining brighter than the rest, and whispered, maybe she just did. That was the moment I knew. I'd go back to the company. But not to reclaim my throne, to use what I'd learned from the streets to rebuild something meaningful. The streets had taught me pain, humility, and truth. Now I would take those lessons back into the world that had forgotten them, but fate wasn't done testing me. Because just as I thought life had finally come full circle, something unexpected happened. Something that would shake every belief I had rebuilt. It happened on a morning I never expected anything from. I was sitting by the fountain near the park, my usual place to warm my hands in the sun, when a familiar black car stopped across the street. The kind of car I once used to own, with polished rims and glass so dark you couldn't see who sat inside. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a gray suit. His shoes hit the pavement with the confidence of someone who still lived in the world I'd fallen out of. For a moment I didn't care. I'd stopped caring about people in suits a long time ago. But then he said my name. Mr. Watson? I looked up slowly. My beard had grown, my hair had turned messy, and my coat smelled of smoke and dust. But the way he said it, with hesitation and disbelief, made me realize he recognized me. It was Daniel Harris, my former company's chief financial officer. The man who once reported to me, now standing before me with eyes wide as if he'd seen a ghost. "Sir," he said again, stepping closer. "It's really you, isn't it?" I gave a small, tired smile. "It was me once. I'm not sure who I am now." He blinked rapidly. "We thought you were dead. After the collapse. After the fire at your apartment. No one could find you. We even held a memorial." I let out a dry laugh. "Seems I miss my own funeral." Daniel crouched down beside me. His polished shoes nearly touched my worn-out boots. "Sir, you have no idea what's happened since you left. The investigation cleared your name. The fraud wasn't yours. It was your partner, Richard Hale. He took everything and fled the country. The board wants you back. You're still the legal owner of several holdings. You can rebuild everything." I stared at him, unblinking. My mind should have jumped at the chance. Wealth, power, redemption. Everything I had once thought was life itself. But I didn't feel what I expected. Instead, I felt uneasy. I looked down at my coat, at the small paper heart still pinned to the inside pocket. Be kind. It matters. I thought about the people I'd met. Old Joe, the blind musician, the soldier with no home, the little girl with the red coat. I had found more truth on these streets than in all the boardrooms I'd ever ruled. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what do you think life means?" He looked startled. "Sir, I used to think it meant winning," I continued. "Building more, earning more, being more. But now I've seen people with nothing who still smile, still give, still believe. Maybe I had it all wrong." Daniel swallowed hard. "Sir, you can still make a difference. But not from here. Come back. You can help more people if you're back in power." That sentence hit me differently. Help more people. Not control, not earn, help. Maybe he was right. Maybe this time I could use my second chance to rebuild something real. Not just an empire, but a legacy of compassion. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked, but my heart felt light. "All right, Daniel, take me home." He helped me into the car. As the engine roared to life, the city passed by outside the tinted window. The same streets I had once walked, now fading behind me. But I didn't leave them with pride or guilt. I left them with gratitude, because those streets had taught me what money never could. When we reached the office building, my old headquarters, hundreds of employees stood frozen in shock as I walked through the glass doors in my tattered coat. Some gasped, some whispered, but all moved aside. And as I stood there in the middle of that shining marble lobby, surrounded by faces that once feared me, I didn't feel powerful. I felt human. "Get everyone together," I told Daniel. "We have work to do. But this time, it's not for profit. It's for people." And that's how the new Watson Corporation was born. Not a tech empire anymore, but a foundation for those who had fallen through life's cracks, just like I once did. It's strange how life circles back. How the same streets that once buried you in dust can one day bloom beneath your feet again. Months had passed since Daniel found me that morning. Watson Corporation was no longer a tech empire chasing profit margins and shareholders. I had turned it into something else, a foundation dedicated to rebuilding lives. We called it the Heart Project. The name wasn't mine. It came from a little girl, though I didn't even know if she was still alive. That paper heart she'd given me, with the words, "Be kind. It matters." I had framed it in my new office, right above the desk that once overflowed with stock reports and revenue charts. Now sat a small glass frame holding that wrinkled piece of paper. It reminded me, every single day, that compassion is a currency worth more than gold. We built homes for the homeless, rehab centers for veterans, and shelters for children lost in the city's noise. I didn't just write checks, I visited. I sat with them, ate with them, listened to their stories. And every time I heard laughter where once there was silence, I felt a quiet peace inside me. Still, there was one unfinished chapter in my story. The little girl in the red coat. I often went back to that same bridge where we met, carrying sandwiches and blankets, hoping to see her again. But she never came. One winter morning, as the snow began to fall, I returned there again, this time with Daniel. We handed out food to the people sleeping under the bridge. As I was about to leave, an old woman with kind eyes approached me, "You're the man who gives food every year," she said. "You're looking for someone, aren't you?" I nodded softly. "A little girl, red coat, about 8 years old. She gave me this." I showed her a photo of the framed paper heart. The woman's expression softened, then dimmed with sadness. "Ah, that must be Lily." The name hit me like a whisper from the past. "Lily? She used to come here with her mother," the woman said, "always bringing sandwiches for others. But," she paused, lowering her gaze, "her mother passed away last year. Lily got sick too. They said she didn't make it." My breath caught in my throat. The world blurred. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of the river below and the wind whistling through the bridge rails. That little girl, the one who gave me hope when I had nothing, was gone. I knelt down beside the frozen pavement, tears mixing with the snow. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't speak. After a long silence, I reached into my pocket and took out a small red ribbon I'd been carrying, the one I found by the bridge months ago, fluttering in the rain. I tied it gently to the metal railing. "For you, Lily," I whispered. "You taught me what it means to live." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went back to my office, turned on the dim desk lamp, and looked at the framed paper heart again. The pencil lines had faded, but the words still shone clear. "Be kind. It matters." And right there, I made a promise. The next morning, the world woke up to news headlines that said, "Former billionaire donates entire fortune to the homeless, declares kindness his only wealth." People called it madness. Some called it mercy. I didn't care what they called it. For the first time, I knew peace. I spent the rest of my days walking those same streets, not as a beggar, not as a billionaire, but as Watson, the man who finally understood life's true value. Now, when I sit on that same bridge every winter, I see people handing out food, children laughing, fires warming strangers. And sometimes, when the snow falls just right, I swear I can still see a flash of red. A little girl's coat disappearing into the light. She changed everything. And because of her, the world became a little kinder. The end.